Welcome to a forum on water fluoridation in the city of Athens. This has been a highly charged and controversial issue for many decades across the country. Athens is no exception to that. It's been voted on by the residents on 3 different occasions, voted down on all of those occasions. The city did reconsider it in 1997 and began fluoridating the water after a 1997 decision by City Council. And fluoridation started in 2002. That's when it actually began in the city. As science advances and we see new evidence on public health issues, I feel that it's important to re-examine what we're doing in our communities in terms of public health. And there have been some recent developments regarding fluoridation that I felt warranted another look at it for the community of Athens. One of those, least important of all, is the cost. It has doubled the fluoridation chemicals for the city last year compared to the year before. The second issue is paramount, and it's extremely important. There was a 2006 National Research Council publication titled Fluoride in Drinking Water, and it was a very balanced examination of the toxicity of fluoride, and it has some ramifications on water fluoridation if you examine the data they describe in that report. It was hundreds of pages long with hundreds of references. And following that, the American Dental Association came out with a warning that young infants not receive formula made with fluoridated water. So it's something that, a recommendation they came out with, but communities have not taken the steps necessary to provide alternative water for parents with young infants. Lastly, there's been a growing professional statement to end fluoridation, signed by now more than 2,600 professionals across the country and across the world, with 52 signers from the state of Ohio. So many people in our own state here have signed on to that. I was hoping that we could hold a forum with both sides of the issue present, both sides of the debate. The Ohio Department of Health declined to participate in the debate. They don't generally participate in these types of panels when there's an opposition side presented. But I will read a little bit, just highlight some of the stuff from a communication from them. The Ohio Department of Health endorses fluoridation. They believe that it's economical and beneficial. They believe that it's necessary to prevent tooth decay, and that it's good public policy. They say that it benefits people of all ages and does not discriminate. They also they talked about the National Research Council publication of 2006 and said that it was examining higher levels of fluoride than community water fluoridation provide for. And that is indeed true. They don't believe that it has an impact on water fluoridation, but there's some scientific controversy on that. We are very lucky to have Dr. Paul Conant here this evening. He is one of the world experts on water fluoridation research as a leading critic and opponent of the practice. He received his undergraduate degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University in England and his PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. He has been a professor at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York for the past 23 years and retired as a full professor in May of 2006 with a specialty in environmental chemistry and toxicology throughout his career. He's researched waste management for more than 20 years and fluoridation for 13, and has given over 2,000 pro bono presentations to citizens and decision makers in 49 states in the U.S. and 52 countries. Ralph Nader said of Paul Conant that he is the only man I know who makes waste interesting, and perhaps we can all say that about him after his presentation tonight. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Conant.
Thank you, Allahu, for organizing this meeting, and thank you, everybody, for coming, and those who are watching at home on television. As the title suggests, I shall be explaining why we should be stopping fluoridation not only in Athens, Ohio, but around the world. And I just want to comment quickly on the rejection of the debate by Colleen Wolfe of the Ohio Department of Health. This is her letter to Elihu. Our reasoning for not participating in debates on fluoridation is simple. Debates give the illusion that a scientific controversy exists. I've highlighted a couple of sections which I'm going to show you again in a different context. All major dental and public health associations, the ADA, etc., support the practice of fluoridation. Community water fluoridation has been recognized as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. Debates and public hearings give the vocal minority a forum to spread misinformation and fear. Often opponents call for a debate so that the people can decide who is right. However, after listening to unfounded claims of harm and implications that water is poisoned by fluoride, the public is more confused than ever. Anti-fluoridationists steal undeserved credibility just by sharing the podium with dental public health officials who are there to defend fluoridation. It is a no-win situation. If members of council have questions after Mr. Connett, notice Mr. Connett, appears, please have them submit these questions to our office, to Miss Jane McKinley of the American Dental Association, or to the Division of Oral Health Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I'm sure we can answer questions that arise with sound scientific documentation. Sincerely. You can't steal credibility from anyone. You have to earn it. And I think over the last 24 years, I've earned my credibility. I don't get paid for what I do. But those two quotes that I highlighted are exact quotes from a statement made by Michael Easley, who I believe has worked with Colleen. And she doesn't acknowledge, by the way, that these are quotes from somebody else. Debates give the illusion that a scientific controversy exists, where no credible people, blah, blah, blah. Opponents steal undeserved credibility just by sharing the stage. It might be worth to continue this quote from Easley. Unfortunately, a most flagrant abuse of the public trust occasionally occurs when a physician or a dentist, for whatever personal reason, uses their professional standing in the community to argue against fluoridation, a clear violation of professional ethics, the principles of science, and community standards of practice. In my view, these comments stand professionalism upside down and clearly no notion of what science is about. No issue in science is beyond debate, and certainly not this one, although the proponents obviously would like to put it beyond debate. Okay, my presentation tonight is in two parts. Part one, 10 arguments why fluoridation should be stopped. There are many more, but I'm focusing on just 10. More details on health concerns and lack of effectiveness. That'll be in the second part. I'm not sure how far I will get, but both of these parts are available to anybody that wants it. If you have a pen drive, you can get it tonight. If not, I shall leave a copy with Elihu and the council, so you will be able to access it later. Okay, let's start with the 10 arguments why fluoridation should be stopped. First of all, fluoride is not a nutrient and not necessary for healthy teeth. The level used, 1 part per million, is not small. Fluoridation is a very poor medical practice. Fluoride does not work systemically. Most countries don't fluoridate their water, but their kids' teeth are as good as those that do. The evidence of benefit is very weak. Modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. There are many health concerns. There is not an adequate margin of safety to protect everyone. The fluoridation chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade, and promotion and defense of fluoridation is not scientific. I'll go through each of those in turn. First of all, fluoride is not a nutrient and not necessary for healthy teeth. To demonstrate that something's a nutrient, you have to starve the animal or the human of that nutrient. And if they develop a disease, then it is a nutrient, an essential nutrient. For example, if you starved everybody of vitamin C, they would develop scurvy. Well, they've tried to do that. They've tried to starve an animal of fluoride. It developed no disease at all. So it's not a nutrient. Secondly, the level of fluoride used about 1 part per million. It varies in the United States from 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million. Is not small. They like to claim that it's small. It's 1 part per million is 1 cent in $10,000, 1 inch in 16 miles. The implication is it's so tiny it couldn't possibly hurt you. In fact, 1 part per million is 250 times the level of fluoride in mother's milk. And what this means, of course, is if you bottle feed a baby in Athens or any other fluoridated community, that baby is going to get 250 times more fluoride than from mother's milk, what nature intended. Using the public water supply to deliver medicine is a very poor medical practice. Why? Well, first of all, engineers can control the concentration in the waterworks, obviously, and they do a good job of that by and large. That's milligrams per litre. What they can't do is they can't control the dose that people get. That's milligrams per day. Why? Well, because people drink different amounts of water, and they can get fluoride from many other sources today, including dental products, pesticides, air pollution, and so on. No one is monitoring the individual's side effects. Nobody. Fluoride is a very toxic substance. It interferes with many important biological processes. In fact, the first people that opposed fluoridation in the 1950s were biochemists, particularly biochemists that had used fluoride as an inhibitor of enzymes. And this included James Sumner from Cornell University, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on enzyme chemistry. There's not an adequate margin of safety from known health effects to protect everyone. And there is, incidentally, no argument about the fact that fluoride damages health. None at all. Millions of people have had their lives wrecked by naturally occurring fluoride in India and China and some other countries. The argument is whether at 1 part per million you're going to damage people's health. They, of course, would say no, and I'm saying, wait a moment, let's look at the data. It's a poor medical practice. Fluoridation violates an individual's right to exercise informed consent for the medicine they take. A doctor can't force you to take a medicine. He or she is obliged to tell you the benefits and the side effects, and then you choose. That's the law. And it's also modern medical ethics. So fluoridation allows a local or state government to do to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. Force them to take a medication. An extraordinary thing is that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has never regulated fluoride for ingestion. Its official classification of fluoride is that it's an unapproved drug. Now, because it's never regulated fluoride as a drug, even though it's the most prescribed medication in American history, means that it's not been subjected to randomized clinical trials, RCT, which is the gold standard for epidemiology. And it hasn't been tested either for effectiveness or safety with RCT trials. Extraordinary situation. However, the FDA does regulate fluoridated toothpaste. And when you get home, or if you're at home right now, you might go to the bathroom and have a look at a tube of toothpaste and see the warning on that toothpaste. First of all, it's a drug. Do not swallow. Use a pea-sized amount. There's a pea-sized amount if you didn't know what a pea looks like. And here's the warning. Keep out of reach of children under 6 years of age. If more than used for brushing is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact a poison center right away. So that's if you swallow a pea-sized amount or more. Now, to put that into perspective, a pea-sized amount of toothpaste has about 0.5 milligram of fluoride in it, which is equivalent to somewhere between 1 and 2 glasses of fluoridated water. Needless to say, we don't get this FDA warning on the taps because they don't regulate fluoride for ingestion, only on dental products for topical treatment. In the United States in 2002, 24,000 cases of poisoning by toothpaste, or people going to poison centres because of swallowing toothpaste. Fluoride does not work systemically. Even promoters of fluoridation, like the Centre of Disease Control, now admit this. This is a quote from a CDC paper in 1999. Essentially, what they say is that we used to think that fluoride had to accumulate in the enamel of the teeth before the teeth had erupted from under the gums, so that when they had erupted, the teeth would be strengthened, the enamel would be strengthened, and more resistant to acid attack. Those acids, of course, coming from the breakdown of sugar by bacteria. They conclude, however, laboratory and epidemiologic research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical. In other words, it works from the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. And I think most people would say, well, if it doesn't work from inside the body, why are we swallowing it and exposing every tissue in the body? Especially when a topical treatment is readily available to everybody in the world, fluoridated toothpaste. Now, this is what Arvid Carlsson said. Arvid Carlsson is a Swedish pharmacologist, neuropharmacologist, who led the successful campaign against fluoridation in Sweden in the 1970s. And this is what he said recently in an interview. He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2000. He says, in pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it's awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment, topical treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there, they're available for you, why drink the stuff? Pretty rational stuff. Okay. Next, most countries don't fluoridate their water. In the United States, the people promoting fluoridation would like to make you believe that everybody's drinking fluoridated water. And if you don't do this, you're somehow against progress, you're behind the curve, as it were, and you should catch up. And indeed, over 180 million Americans are drinking fluoridated water every day of their lives. And so most Americans are drinking fluoridated water. But the vast majority of the population worldwide is not. The vast majority of countries worldwide are not doing it. In Europe, 98% of Western Europe does not drink fluoridated water. Names which have, of countries where I'm sure you're aware, have very fine scientists, doctors and dentists, and yet they're not forcing fluoridation on their populations. A few of them do fluoridate their salt. Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland fluoridate their salt, but they too are in a minority. So the minority of European countries do not drink fluoridated water, nor consume fluoridated salt, and yet their teeth are just as good, if not better, than the countries that do. And continuing with the numbers for a moment, only 8 countries have more than 50% of their populations drinking fluoridated water. Australia, Colombia, Ireland, Israel, I'm not sure if it's actually over 50% in Israel, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States. Most of them English-speaking, most of them heavily influenced by both America and England on this practice. Evidence of benefit is very weak. This is perhaps the shocker of all time, because many people out there have taken at face value the notion that fluoridation works. It reduces tooth decay. And if there's been any controversy, it has been, is it safe to do this? Not does it work. And the shock then is to actually look at the evidence, the scientific evidence, and find that the evidence that it works is extremely weak. And I've already mentioned that there are no randomized controlled trials to demonstrate effectiveness, no grade A studies. Now, here's a graph from the Centre of Disease Control, which I should be having more to say, but basically this is part of the US Public Health Service and is the #1 proponent of fluoridation in the United States, the Centre of Disease Control. And in 1999, they produced a paper which underpinned a statement which has been quoted all over the world: fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. You'll notice that Colleen, in her email to Elihu, mentions that. Everybody mentions it. Every journalist, every editorial, every decision maker mentions the CDC, says it's one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. So how good is this paper that underpins this statement? Well, on effectiveness, they produced this figure. The blue line means DMFT, and DMFT means decayed, missing, and filled teeth, a normal way of measuring tooth decay in scientific studies. That's tooth decay in 12-year-olds. And you notice the tooth decay in 12-year-olds in the United States was coming down from the 60s to the 90s in that period. And at the same time, on this graph, the red line, the percentage of the American population drinking fluoridated water was going up. So were many other things. The sale of bicycles, telephone directories, many things were going up over that same period. The fallacy here is the notion that that blue line is coming down because that red line is going up. And there was an easy way that these people at the CDC could have checked this out, because the World Health Organization actually tracks the blue line in countries all over the world. And so now what I'm going to show you is the blue line, or the equivalent, in 18 different countries. 14 are fluoridated and 4 are not. But remember that the CDC says the blue line is coming down because the red line is going up. Well, there they are. They're the lines. You can see the red line again is the United States line. 14, those top 14 countries are unfluoridated. The bottom 4 are fluoridated. Can you tell the difference? Can you tell which line belongs to a fluoridated country and which line belongs to a non-fluoridated country? If you can, you're better than me. Most people cannot tell the difference. Now, you have to wonder how so-called competent people being paid far much more money than I've ever got paid could possibly produce this first graph and be unaware that the CDC was plotting the same data and not be aware of that. Let's move on. If we compare US states, a survey was done by the National Health Service, or what is it called, the Department of Health and Human Services, issued a questionnaire, 50 different questionnaires in 50 different states on health. And one of the questions was, are your children's teeth very good or excellent? There may have been a whole series of questions, but one of the questions was, are your children's teeth excellent, very good? Unfortunately, the next two pictures are missing, but I have a summary slide. Here it is. Okay. What does this slide show? Those dots there represent the percentage of the population in each of the 50 states, the percentage of the drinking fluoridated water. So on the left-hand side, in that left-hand corner, you've got a state that is very little of the water is fluoridated, and go to the other end, and you've got a state that is 100% fluoridated. And in between, you're somewhere in between. And now what I'm going to plot on here is the answer to the question, are your children's teeth very good or excellent? And this is the result of 50 questionnaires. Now, that was for low-income families. That's low-income families. You notice there's a lot of noise there. But there is no parallel. I mean, if there was a relationship between kids having very good or excellent teeth and drinking fluoridated water, you'd expect that purple line there to be running roughly parallel. Okay, there's going to be some noise with the other line. And if you do it for the high-income families, there's far less noise. It hovers around 80% of high-income families saying their children's teeth are very good or excellent. Now, clearly there's no relationship between either of those lines and the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. But you do see a strong relationship between income levels and tooth decay. And that's the real issue, that poverty is what gives you tooth decay. And that's what we should be talking about. Poverty and everything that comes with it, which includes poor diet, poor supervision, lack of money for dental care, and so on. That's what contributes to tooth decay. And the whole business of adding fluoride to the water is a complete distraction from this reality. and from the reality that, unfortunately, over 80% of dentists in this country will not treat children on Medicaid. There's just poor returns on it. Okay, the same thing, or similar. In this case, we're looking at a tooth decay in third graders, averaged by county. Those dots right there are all the counties in New York State. This is a New York Department of Health survey. And please remember the New York Department of Health is pro-fluoridation, so we're not dealing with antis here. And so the average of tooth decay in third graders. Well, there are all the dots again. And again, the bottom axis from 0 to 100 is the percentage of the county with water fluoridated. And that black line is the linear regression line, the best straight line fit for that data, which is absolutely flat, which in scientific mathematical terms means there is no relationship between these two things, the average tooth decay by county and the percentage of the county fluoridated. However, if you plot it against income levels, there's the relationship again. And I plotted it now just like the other one. The black line represents the percentage of the county on fluoridated water. The red line is the low income families. The blue line is the high income. This time we're looking at decay. And again, you see the lines are pretty well separated. There's a couple of places where they touch or overlap. But by and large, the relationship with income levels is pretty clear, but no relationship. If you look at the linear regression lines again, no relationship with the black line, the percentage of the counties fluoridated. The message: if governments and dentists are generally concerned about tooth decay in children, then target families of low income for special attention. Do not expose the whole population to uncontrolled doses of a known toxic substance. Now, reviewing the data worldwide, this is from David Locker, a review he did for the Ontario Ministry of Health. He found the magnitude of fluoridation's effect, i.e. benefits, is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. The largest survey ever done in the United States was done by the National Institute of Dental Research. They looked at the teeth of over 39,000 children in 84 communities. An independent review of the raw data by Dr. Yamianis, a well-known opponent of fluoridation, indicated no statistically significant difference in average decayed, missing, and filled teeth between the kids who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, or all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, or part of their lives in both. And here's the graph that he produced. There are the three lines for tooth decay in 5-year-olds to 17-year-olds, not fluoridated, partially fluoridated, and fluoridated. And the lines overlap. Once again, there is no statistical difference relating tooth decay with the fluoridation status of communities. But the National Institute of Dental Research jacked up the sensitivity of their data. And instead of looking at decayed, missing, and filled teeth, they looked at decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. There are approximately 5 surfaces to the teeth. The cutting ones, the top ones and the bottom ones, have 4 surfaces. But about 4 to 5 times as much sensitivity. And they did find a difference. They found a difference. The average tooth decay for 5 to 17-year-olds was 3.4 decayed, missing, filled surfaces in the non-fluoridated communities and 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces in the fluoridated. Remember, you have 5 surfaces to a tooth. We're talking about less than a tooth. In fact, we are talking about a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface out of approximately 100 surfaces in a child's mouth. Negligible. Negligible. And when you bear in mind the health risks that we may be taking to achieve this questionable benefit, again, you have to question this practice. Modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. Studies were done in Finland, Cuba, East Germany, and British Columbia. One community in Finland fluoridated, and then they stopped. Cuba, again, one community fluoridated, and then they stopped. East Germany, when the two Germanys combined, East Germany stopped fluoridating. And British Columbia, practically no communities in British Columbia now fluoridate their water. Here are the 4 studies. The one from East Germany, the one from Cuba, the one from Canada, the one from Finland. And I should point out that none of these people are recognized as opponents of fluoridation. There are many health concerns. Allahu referred to this very important National Research Council report. A panel of 12 experts, and for the first time in US history, they included on this review panel both scientists that were pro-fluoridation and scientists that were against fluoridation. The scientists against fluoridation had never been involved with a review of the toxicology of fluoride before. And of course, the majority of the panelists were neither for or against. They were pretty neutral, not involved. They spent 3.5 years reviewing the literature and produced a report 507 pages long with 1,100 references. And I'm happy to tell you I was the only scientist who was publicly opposed to fluoridation who was actually asked to testify in person at one of their public meetings. I have testified immediately after the Center of Disease Control. They produced their report on March the 22nd, 2006. They had a chapter devoted to fluoride's ability to damage the teeth, Chapter 4, damage the bone, Chapter 5, damage the brain, Chapter 7, the endocrine system, Chapter 8, possibility that it might cause osteosarcoma, Chapter 10. And they did not look at artificial water fluoridation per se. They were not asked to make a judgment about water fluoridation, especially not about its effectiveness or otherwise. And there was no restriction, by the way. There is a complete myth that somehow this only refers to water at 4 parts per million. They made no restriction on the level of fluoride in their studies. In some studies, the fluoride was high. In some times, the fluoride was low. No restrictions. And also, Chapter 2, they did an exposure analysis. And the shocking revelation of the exposure analysis is that some people are already exceeding the so-called safe reference doses of the EPA by drinking fluoridated water and fluoride from other sources. There are certain subgroups, one of them being bottle-fed infants. And it's that which triggered the ADA's recommendation that parents not use fluoridated water to make up a baby formula. Another thing helped to trigger that. There was a study done from Iowa by Stephen Levy, which showed that the most vulnerable year for developing dental fluorosis, which is a mottling of the enamel, occurs in the first year. So that's why, putting the two together, it was a good recommendation. The only trouble was, they took no steps to get this information to the public, only to their membership. Okay, well, here's some direct quotes from this report. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Several lines of information indicate an effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. All members of the committee agreed that there is scientific evidence that under certain conditions, fluoride can weaken bone and increase the risk of fractures. Now, again, let me stress, these are known health effects, no argument. The argument is going to come is, are these effects likely to occur from drinking fluoridated water, and in the case of bone, over a whole lifetime? That's where the argument comes. I'm particularly concerned about the brain. The baby's developing brain. At birth, the baby's blood-brain barrier is not fully developed. The blood-brain barrier, which is a vascular system, prevents most toxic substances from entering the brain. Certainly most water-soluble substances entering the brain. And it's quite disturbing to find that barrier is not working properly when the baby is born, And so the baby is very vulnerable to attack from neurotoxins at this period. And in my view, at least, the baby should not be exposed to fluoride at 250 times the level of fluoride that occurs in mother's milk. I mean, nobody knows why nature didn't put fluoride in mother's milk. No one knows. But she usually has her reasons. And this might be one of them. Now, this is what Arvid Carlson said. We've already referred to him in 1978. One wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride such as occurs in bottle-fed infants may mean for the development of the brain and other organs. Now, that turns out to be a really prophetic statement. I should point out that he got his Nobel Prize for chemicals, neuropharmacochemicals, chemicals which are designed to get into the brain and, do things to help patients. So he's very interested in the brain. Well, since he made that statement, there have now been over 50 animal experiments which shows that fluoride can damage the brain. Here's one of them. Rats given 1 part per million fluoride in their water for 1 year. That's the same level that we get in our water. Both groups had kidney damage, brain damage, greater uptake of aluminium into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits, which some people think are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. An extraordinary finding. Human studies. There have now been 23 published studies, 5 still have not been translated from Chinese, indicating that moderate to high fluoride exposure is associated with lowered IQ in children. And the whole list of these studies you can find on our webpage, fluoridalert.org/brain. Now, I'm interested in this study. I've met Zhang on several occasions at several conferences, and he invited me to go to China and have a look at the 2 villages where he did this study, which I did. And the remarkable thing is that these villages are, first of all, the population has been stable for literally centuries. They don't move. They all have the same occupation. They're all farmers, rural farmers. They all have the same housing. They all have the same diet, the same food. They all have the same schooling. And so it's remarkable populations to compare. The only difference was that in the 2 villages, they have different levels of fluoride in the well water. Great place to do epidemiology. So one village had less than 0.7 parts per million, and the other village had 2.5 to 4.5 parts per million fluoride in the well water. Now, Zhang controlled for lead exposure and iodine intake, both of which can interfere with mental development. And he found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. And he estimated that, taking all the data and plotting it in one graph, that the lowering would occur at about 1.9 parts per million. That was when he first noticed it. Now, I would argue that there is no adequate margin of safety to protect everybody from this end effect, because this study is associating a lowering of IQ at 1.9, but it's a small population. There's about a few hundred kids in this study. And now if we're going to extrapolate to the millions of children in, say, the United States, we need a margin of safety. We cannot assume that the whole range of its sensitivity to anything is covered by a population of 300 kids. So you've got to have a margin of safety. This is the standard thing you do in toxicology. You take a known result and then you apply a safety margin to determine a safe level for a population exposure. There's no adequate margin of safety to protect all children in society where millions are drinking uncontrolled amounts of fluoridated water. At that level. The whole population, of course, includes those with poor diet, those with borderline iodine deficiency, those who may be particularly sensitive to this endpoint. And I would argue no wonder nature kept the level of fluoride so low in mother's milk. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this margin of safety, because it's something that the proponents will never get into. They will always dismiss every study that we find a problem as a high dose. Oh, that's a high doses. That's a high doses. Not relevant to water fluoridation. But what they have to do, if you're being scientific, is to calculate a margin of safety, once you've got the toxic dose, you need to determine the safe dose, you need a margin of safety. And what we normally do is to use a margin of safety of 100 between the toxic dose and the beneficial dose. Let me explain. 1 factor of 10 is to allow for the complete range of sensitivity in a human population. It's called intraspecies variation. And the other factor of 10 is to allow, in this case, for the whole range of doses that you're going to get in a population. Some people are going to drink 10 times more water than other people. So you need a safety factor of 100. Now let's look at what we found, what we know. At 1 part per million, increased uptake of aluminium into rat brain, okay, just an animal study. Dental fluorosis impacts over 30% of American children in fluoridated communities. Osteosarcoma in young men, those studies are mixed, but obviously a concern. At 1.5 parts per million, a doubling of hip fractures in a Chinese study done by Americans, but it was done in China. Now that doubling of hip fractures was not significant, but the tripling of hip fractures at 4.3 was statistically significant, and so what we're looking at here is a trend. And therefore, whilst it may not be statistically significant at 1.5, it may be physically real. Sometimes you can't always get statistical significance, even with real results. Depends on how many data points you have. 1.9, as you've heard, lowering of IQ. At 2.3, lowering of thyroid activity. At 3 parts per million, lowering fertility rates in the United States. Now, it may be possible for the pro-fluoridation people to dismiss all these studies, dismiss them on methodological weaknesses and so on. Maybe, but they've yet to do it. Now, the next point is the fluoridating chemicals used. Oh, I forgot to give you the bottom line. Clearly, if you want a margin of safety of 100, you ain't got it. You haven't got anything like a margin of safety of 100. You haven't even got a margin of safety of 10. We continue. The fluoridating chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade. Many people have been shocked at this. Many dentists are out there believing that what they're using is pharmaceutical grade fluoride like is in dental products. But no. The fluoridating chemicals are obtained from the wet scrubbers of the phosphate fertilizer industry. This is hazardous waste according to the EPA. It cannot be dumped into the sea by international law or locally because it is too concentrated. But if the waste is purchased by someone, it becomes a product and is no longer covered by US hazardous waste regulations. Extraordinary. And so not only are we using the public water supply to deliver medication, which has never been done with any other vitamin, nutrient, drug, or what have you, which in itself is unusual, but we're also using the public water supply to get rid of hazardous waste. With the rationale, of course, the answer to pollution is dilution. By the time you've diluted it with the public water supply, everything's hunky-dory. But notice, in international law, they don't apply that to the sea, which has essentially infinite dilution. The chemicals used in over 90% of the water fluoride in the United States are the silicon fluorides, hexafluorosilicic acid or its sodium salt. Neither of these chemicals, either in their pure form or the contaminated solutions used, and by the way, this scrubbing liquor is contaminated with a number of toxic materials like lead, arsenic, even radioactive isotopes. The same rock that is mined for for phosphate in Florida is also mined for uranium. So there's trace amounts of radioactive materials in there. And none of them, these chemicals, have been put through rigorous toxicological testing. Practically no testing at all. All the testing has been done on high-grade sodium fluoride. The promotion of fluoridation is not scientific. Fluoridation is promoted via endorsements. You got a whiff of that from Colleen's email at the beginning. Oh, the ADA, the AMA, blah, 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 blah. All these organizations endorse fluoridation. But they don't use scientific studies. There's always endorsements, endorsements, endorsements to promote this thing. Endorsements work with the general public. They're impressed by this, just as Michael Jordan can sell Nike shoes because he's a great basketball player, and kids go out and want these Nike shoes because Michael Jordan says they're good. So many communities are saying fluoridation must be good because all these professional organizations are telling us it's great. It doesn't satisfy a scientist. He wants to see the data. Talking about unscientific, when the US Public Health Service first endorsed fluoridation in 1950, not one single trial for effectiveness had been completed. No studies completed on effectiveness, and no health studies had been published. And these endorsements that Colleen Wolfe referred to came in the 1950, 51 and 52, again before any trials had been completed or any health studies had been published. And some of these organizations have never gone back and reviewed the literature, if they ever did, and certainly none of them are up to date as far as the National Research Council report is concerned. For over 60 years, the fluoridation debate has been controlled largely by the dental profession. This profession has a single focus on teeth with little or no expertise on other health issues. That's how they see us, I think, as a mouthful huge. Our bodies are dominated by this mouthful of teeth, which they've got to protect. God bless them. I, on the other hand, see bodies like this, which is probably equally repulsive, I think, to some people. Looking at bodies instead of seeing personalities and beauty, I see livers and pelvises and things. Well, never mind, never mind. The ADA does not behave scientifically. I'm going to read to you an extraordinary statement from the American Dental Association from 1979. They said, individual dentists must be convinced that they need not be familiar with scientific reports of laboratory and field investigations on fluoridation to be effective participants in the promotion program, and that non-participation is overt neglect of professional responsibility. Now, if that is not an Alice in Wonderland definition of professionalism, I wonder how many other professions would subscribe to the notion you don't have to be on top of your subject to go out there to the public and promote X, Y, or Z. To me, it's extraordinary. The CDC is hopelessly biased on fluoridation. I mean, this goes straight back to the US Public Health Service, endorsed it in 1950. Every US Surgeon General has waxed lyrical on its benefits ever since, and all the health agencies of the mighty US Public Health Service genuflected before this policy. The CDC is the agency which promotes it, and promotes it via each state health department. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that Colleen's salary comes from the CDC. But when you check into it, you find that there's only one division at the CDC which is looking after fluoridation, and that's the Oral Health Division. Oral Health Division aggressively promotes fluoridation throughout the United States, to the point that they will go and support mandatory statewide fluoridation. They've done recently in Oregon, in Arkansas, and in New Jersey. But the OHD personnel have mainly dental qualifications. If you look at their qualifications, they're all DMD, Doctor of Medical Dentistry, or whatever it is, dental degrees. And I think there's one PhD who's an economist, and maybe another PhD, but by and large, no medical degrees, no specialized knowledge of toxicology, risk assessment, or anything else. And the shocker is there's nobody else at the CDC which has oversight on the safety of the program. So you've got one division that's promoting it, making all the statements about it, clearly has a conflict of interest because it's their policy, they're promoting it. But nobody at the CDC is saying, we're looking at the safety of this, we're looking at all the latest studies, blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't happen. Let's look at a clear example where politics overrides science on this. As I mentioned, the National Research Council published its landmark report, 507 pages, 1,100 references, on March the 22nd. On the day that it was published, the American Dental Association went public and declared that the NRC review was irrelevant to water fluoridation. They stated that 4 parts per million was much higher than the level used in fluoridation. Not relevant. It took the CDC all of 6 days to say the same thing, that it was consistent with their promotion of fluoridation at 1 part per million. In 2007, the Australian National Health Medical Research Council said the NRC report was not relevant to Australia. In February of 2009, a firm of consultants said that the NRC report was not relevant to fluoridation in the UK. Now, all of these agencies, or authorities, are confusing concentration and dose. It is possible for somebody living in a 1 part per million community to get more fluoride than somebody living in a 4 parts per million community. The dose overlaps. Depends on how much water you drink. So a very high water drinker in a 1 part per million community can get more fluoride than a low water drinker in a 4 parts per million study. But that's not the end of the story. What did the NRC report recommend? They recommended that the EPA lower the safe drinking water standard from 4 parts per million. And they told the EPA to do a new health risk assessment to establish a new safe drinking water standard. After 3.5 years, they haven't done it. Now, again, that could be political. But let's assume it's scientific, that they've struggled for 3.5 years and they've yet to get all their calculations sorted out that they can go public. Something that's defied the US EPA Water Division for 3.5 years could be resolved by the American Dental Association on the same day, and the CDC in 6 days. Of course, we don't have the benefit of any written document which analyzes this. But what they would have had to do was to predict the new MCL and show that that new MCL would still mean that it was irrelevant to water fluoridation. The whole thing is preposterous, as nearly everything else about this subject. And there's the danger. There is a danger, folks. This whole program is so preposterous when you look at it from a scientific perspective that the people that are like yourselves listening to this have to believe who is telling the truth, who is the believable person here. And stacked against us is the US Public Health Service, the American Dental Association, all these professional bodies that assure you with utmost confidence that this practice is safe and effective. Do you believe all those guys, or do you believe a little old professor of chemistry? And unfortunately, most people will go with authority. They don't have time to do any reading themselves, so you take the Nike shoes because it's Michael Jordan, or it's the US Surgeon General. That's the problem. We're up against power and money. Key health studies have not been done in fluoridated countries. Not only did they not have health studies before they endorsed this practice in 1950, but they haven't really bothered to collect it since. There's been no investigation of a possible relationship between consumption of fluoridated water and lowered IQ in children, arthritic symptoms in adults, hyperthyroidism, underactive thyroid, increased bone fractures in children, earlier onset of puberty, Alzheimer's disease in adults, and the many, many anecdotal reports that some people are particularly sensitive to fluoride. Maybe 1% of the population is very sensitive to fluoride. None of these things are being studied scientifically. None of the studies in India and China, etc., on these things are being reproduced in fluoridated countries. These studies are being published in China and India and elsewhere because they have no policy to protect. They are not done in the United States because we have a policy to protect. It's more important for the credibility of these agencies that we never find out that this was a mistake. And for as far as the ADA is concerned, they may have another interest of fighting off liabilities. The moment they admit that fluoride has caused any health damage, the moment they admit any single health study, then there are going to be lawsuits from one end of the country to the other. And so what you're seeing here is a classic example of working backwards from the desired outcome. The desired outcome is that fluoridation causes no health harm. That's the outcome. And you work backwards. You don't do the studies. And any study that comes along, you attack the methodology, or even worse, attack the person who did the study. If you don't look, you don't find. The absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. Now, here's the Chief Dental Officer of Canada told an audience in Dryden, Ontario. I was there, so I know this is verbatim. He said, "I walked down your high street today and I didn't see anyone growing horns, and you've been fluoridated for 40 years. So this is the way you gauge whether fluoridation is impacting people. You walk down the high street and see if anybody's growing horns. If they're not growing horns, then your policy is perfectly safe, right?" Now, that is, of course, highly facetious, but I want to stress how difficult something like a subtle lowering of IQ, and just lowering IQ by 1 IQ point is significant. And let me illustrate this. It's significant but difficult to find. The IQ in a human population is normally distributed, the typical bell-shaped curve. The average person has an IQ of 100, but you have very bright people over 100 and, 170. They're in the sort of genius, very bright class. And then people, no, that may be 140. But it's right up there, you know. The area under the curve is the total number of children in any population which is very bright or genius. And down there in the mauve, those kids are mentally handicapped. Okay. Now I want to show you, and this is just a mathematical thing, I want to show you what happens if you were to lower the IQ of that population by 5 IQ points. Now, look at the average, first of all. You go from 100, the average would go from 100 to 95. If you were a parent, you wouldn't notice the difference in 5 IQ points between two kids, two siblings. And if you're a school teacher, you wouldn't notice the difference between 100 and 95. You certainly wouldn't notice that drop in your class. However, look what happens to the two tails. You're halving the number of geniuses in your society, and you're doubling the number of mentally handicapped. So something which is not obvious to you can have dire consequences for the health of your society and the economy of your society. But we're not looking. 23 studies around the world says lowering of IQ, and in the United States we haven't done a single study looking at IQ as a function of living in a fluoridated community. One other thing, fluoridation and lead, it's been shown that common fluoridating agents can increase the dissolving of lead from lead pipes and from brass fittings used in pipes. And a little bit of lead can also lower IQ in children. So we could be attacking our kids in two directions here. Summary. The 10 arguments again. Fluoride is not a nutrient and not necessary for healthy teeth. The level used is not small. Fluoridation is a very poor medical practice. It does not work systemically. Most countries don't do it, but their teeth are just as good. The evidence of benefit is very weak. Modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. There are many health concerns, and the bottom line is there's not an adequate margin of safety to protect everyone in your society. The fluoridation chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade, and the promotion and defense of fluoridation is not scientific. We have made a 28-minute videotape on this subject with 15 professionals, including Arvid Carlson, 3 of the people that wrote that NRC report, myself, and a number of other, 2 of the professionals at the EPA. 28 minutes go through the basic arguments against fluoridation. If anybody wants to get that tonight, this is a cheap price. You can buy it from the internet for $20, or you can get it tonight for $10. This doesn't go into my pocket. It helps our recuperate some funds. So this cost us $20,000 to make this tape. And I've also got a version without the fancy packaging, which you can have for $5. And please feel free to make as many copies as you want. Again, just to show that this is not a money-driven reason why I'm here tonight, you can get this for free on the internet. You can go to our webpage and you can just download it for free. It's only if you wanted a hard copy to give to your dentist and so on. And I really recommend that you do give this to your dentist and your doctor and ask them to spend 28 minutes looking at it. This is beautiful. You don't have to argue with this doctor and dentist and get them all riled up because you're against fluoridation. You can say, doctor, would you do me a favor and just watch this tape? It only lasts 28 minutes, and there's 15 professionals explaining why they don't think fluoridation is a good idea. And then when you've looked at it, perhaps we can talk about it again. So instead of you having to do the arguments, these guys would do it for you. And I must tell you, I gave it to my dentist. He's a pretty open-minded guy anyway. But the next day when I went to get my teeth cleaned, he said, that video was excellent. And I'm going to show it to everybody in my office. And what he particularly liked about it is that we come out against water fluoridation, but we don't rule out fluoride for other uses. I mean, if dentists want to use it topically, if you want to use fluoridated toothpaste, there's some arguments against that, but we don't make a big thing of that. Our thing is it shouldn't be put in the drinking water. It shouldn't be forced upon people that don't want it. That's our web address, fluoridalert.org. Now, we also have a professional statement, and if you're really lucky and you get a convert who says, yeah, I agree with you, I think we should stop this thing, ask him or her to sign the professional statement. I think, Ella, you mentioned this. We've now got 2,658 professionals signing this. This is really important because many dentists, and particularly dentists, but some doctors, are intimidated. They will tell you behind closed doors that they're against fluoridation, but they daren't speak out publicly because they're ostracized by their colleagues and so on. The more signatures we can get on there, we're going to give more people moral strength. And if we can get some of those people that are privately against it to come at it publicly, eventually we're going to reach a tipping point. But meanwhile, I think it's very difficult for them to insist that we are Looney Tunes, that the people opposed to fluoridation use junk science, and the only thing they get is from the internet, and all the other usual attacks that they make on us. It's going to be very difficult as that number continues to grow and grow and grow. More resources from our webpage. You can check out 10 facts on fluoride, which more or less coalesce with much of what I've said tonight. In about 3 pages, you can get that. If you want more, there are 50 reasons to oppose fluoridation, which is something I wrote, which has a very interesting history that you can read about. And there's a health effects database, which my wonderful young son, Michael, spent many years putting together. And it goes through fluoride's impact on all the different tissues with all the studies which have been published and excerpts and, in some cases, links to the full papers. So it's an absolute goldmine for anybody that wants to do a little bit of research for themselves. And that brings me to part 2. It also brings me to the end of my hour. And so what I suggest I do is to put this on hold. And maybe I can get to some more details, especially if you want to raise them. Do you want to tell us more about dental fluorosis, for example? Do you want to tell us more about fluoride's impact on the bone? Do you want to tell us about osteosarcoma? This is this rare bone cancer, but usually fatal in young boys, which may be associated with fluoride exposure at a particular time in the growth of the young men. So it's up to you where we go with this, but I think it's important now to tackle your questions. Make them tough ones. Yes?
I really agree with everything you say. And for mature women, is it dangerous to be drinking fluoride water, and does it contribute to osteoporosis?
Dr. Conant, could I ask that you repeat the question?
Yes, yes.
So
the question is, after a nice congratulatory note, the question was, what's the issue for older women? I assume you mean postmenopausal women in particular, and osteoporosis. Obviously, this is a huge concern. Now, one of the things that doctors did from about the 70s through the 90s was to actually treat women after menopause with osteoporosis with sodium fluoride tablets. The notion was that fluoride hardens the bone. It increases bone mineral density. And osteoporosis, as you know, lowers bone mineral density. So they thought that fluoride would counteract this. And sure enough, giving women about 25 milligrams of fluoride a day, 25 milligrams, that would be equivalent to 25 liters of water. did harden the bones, did increase the bone mineral density, but it made the bones weaker. It made them more prone to fracture, so they were increasing hip fracture rates in the women, not decreasing them. Fluoride has different effects on different bones and different parts of the bone, and possibly with different people too. It causes softening of the bones, osteomalacia, loss of bone mineral density, osteoporosis, and hardening of the bones, osteosclerosis. So it's a very complicated subject. But the worrying thing is that 50% of all the fluoride that you get each day from water, from dental products and so on, accumulates in your bones. The kidney can get rid of about 50%. The rest of the 50% concentrates in the hard tissues, the bones, the teeth, but 99% of it is in your bones because you've got so much bone compared to teeth. And over a lifetime. And the symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bones are identical to arthritis. Identical. Aching joints, pains in the bone, and so on. And this is extraordinary. 68 million Americans suffer from arthritis, some form of arthritis, according to the CDC. 1 in 3 American adults have some form of arthritis. And if you ask your doctor, what causes arthritis? He'll say, we don't know. But we think it has something to do with aging. Well, one of the things that's happening with aging population in a fluoridated community is they're getting more and more fluoride in their bones. But the Public Health Service has never funded studies to see if there's a relationship between arthritis and living in a fluoridated community X number of years. Just haven't done it. Yes?
Good question and a comment. I work in construction, and as you were talking about, people drink different amounts of water. And during the summers, I'll easily drink perhaps up to 2 gallons on a hot July day. And so when I became aware of some of this stuff, I attempted to get some kind of filtering mechanism. It's called a Berkey. I'm wondering if you've ever heard of it, if you know anything about, is that a good way to filter it out, or are there any other recommendations?
Okay. Well, first of all, what a good point you've made there. That's one of the things that happened in Chapter 2, that they pointed out there's certain subsets of the population, workers who do physical work, construction work outside, especially in hot climates, military personnel, athletes, or 3 in particular, people with diabetes, drink excessive amounts of water. And they're getting a lot of fluoride. So if you're drinking 8 liters of water a day, you're getting 8 milligrams. And that hip fractures I talked about in that Chinese village, those people were getting about 7 milligrams a day of fluoride. So if you were to keep doing this, mind you, might not be able to do that heavy work the rest of your life. As far as filters are concerned, the Brita filters, the typical activated charcoal filter, will not remove fluoride. Won't do it. The cheap ones won't do it. To remove fluoride, you need reverse osmosis, ion exchange, or distillation. You can distill it, or you can use bottled water, but make sure that you contact the company to find out what the fluoride levels are. And that's, in fact, what my wife and I did whilst our village was fluoridated. It took us 7.5 years to get it out of Canton, New York. But in the interim, we would buy these big 5-gallon drugs, put on a water tower. We'd use that water for cooking and drinking. However, no protection against hot baths and showers. And my wife was really upset because she's a very keen organic gardener, and she's, watering her garden with this fluoride-contaminated water. Not happy. So I'm not sure the filter that you mentioned in your question. What was the filter?
It's called a Berkey.
Berkey.
They advertise a particular filter attachment that they say will remove fluoride.
Okay. Well, if they advertise it, it's certainly something. Getting a fluoride test is not expensive, and it might be worth just checking it out. Get a sample before and afterwards and see what the difference is. And we don't feel bashful about trying to get your local chemistry department at the university involved with this. We need their involvement. And one way would be to ask them if they could do the test for you. At least appraise them of it.
And then real quick, I just had a quick comment for anyone who wanted to know. I live in the Leax water district, so it's actually not the same, I believe, as Athens. I don't know if you buy the chemicals at the same place. But on your point number 9, I traced, just because I was curious, the fluoride products in Leax water does indeed come from a phosphate fertilizer company called PCS Phosphate.
Yes.
So I've spoken to the plant manager personally.
Yeah.
In Florida, and I think they have an office in North Carolina. But so it goes through several distributors, but I personally spoke with the person who manufactures the fluoride products used. And he called it HFS acid.
Yeah, HFS. In fact, you're great, and I'm glad that you do. I wish everybody would be so pugnacious. My son and I rented a private plane and flew over these phosphate plants in Florida, and the next day we drove around them. It's just amazing. These gypsum ponds are like huge, truncated pyramids, huge. And we went into one company and we asked the engineer, and I was particularly interested, if they did any treatment before they put it in the rubber-lined trucks and sent it here, there, and everywhere. Did they treat it in any way, chemically? Did they purify it? No, it's untreated. Yes?
So the hundreds of studies that show that fluoride is beneficial or does not harm people, do you think they're liars?
Just quote me one.
Okay. I have a comprehensive list of all of the studies that were done. It's summarized.
Okay, give me one. One study.
Why should I write down one reference? You know it exists.
No, but you see, the reason I asked that question is that they say that all the time. They say hundreds and thousands. And then when you start to look at the literature, it gets whittled down. I'll give you an example. The York Review looked at several hundred studies on the beneficial effects. And they could find no grade A study, no gold standard epidemiological study to demonstrate benefits. And eventually they ended up with just 6 studies done between 1961 and the 1990s. And even then they found a very minuscule benefit. And I've told you the studies. I mean, the National Institute of Dental Research did that study of 84 communities, 39,000 children, because researchers all over the world, in Australia and New Zealand and in other countries, were finding that there was no difference in tooth decay between fluoridated communities and non-fluoridated communities, which today is translated into no difference in fluoridated countries and non-fluoridated countries. And they did this study in order to settle the issue. And what did they find? No significant difference in DMFT, jacked up the sensitivity by a factor of 5, and found a difference of 0.6 of one tooth surface. And subsequent studies have found actually less. So when you say hundreds of studies have demonstrated the benefits, this is the largest study done by the organization that was set up to investigate tooth decay, promote fluoridation, the National Institute of Dental Research.
So the World Health Organization is wrong, the CDC is wrong, the American Cancer Society, who is kind of devoted to cancer.
Yeah, you know what you're doing? You're going right back to what I warned you about. You are citing endorsements. You're talking about agencies that endorse fluoridation.
Organizations that read literature.
Okay, I don't care how scientific they are.
I'm going to have to jump in here real quick.
It's based. You can only make a judgment based upon the quality of the primary studies that they use. Not, I am the ADA, I am the AMA, and I tell you it's perfectly safe.
I happen to go to the CDC. I work a lot with influenza.
Yeah.
And that's actually where a lot of the actual people in the field go to because it's a reliable source of information on
maybe.
a lot of topics.
Maybe, but I've told you the CDC has only one division looking at this, and that's the Oral Health Division, which is only essentially dental professionals, and their job is to promote fluoridation, and they have a conflict of interest when it comes to any judgments made upon health. Meanwhile, they don't have anybody in their agency that has those qualifications overseeing this program. If you can find out differently, let me know.
Sure.
Please do. Check to see if that's right. You just ask them, have you a division at the... You write to the director, have you a division at the CDC which oversees the safety of fluoridation? Not its benefits, but its safety.
I'll interrupt here just real briefly. I want to remind everyone that people on both sides of this
Yes.
issue, and it gets very heated, and it gets.
I feel like this is like a communist election where you have one candidate.
Well, the other side was invited. Just ask Colleen Wolfe why she wasn't here tonight. Because then she could have done battle and you could have heard both sides. I'm not the one that prevented the debate. I'm here. And I've made everything I've said absolutely transparent, and everything that I've said can be documented. Okay? I've done what I've done, could possibly do as a scientist. I cannot force the people that you believe in to come in the same room and debate me. I can't force them to do that. But if you can encourage them, embarrass them, and persuade them to come in the same room, I will come back to Athens, Ohio, and I will debate them. But they are preventing the debate, not me.
Please
Yeah.
try to keep questions and comments civil and polite, and on the topic.
I didn't think you were uncivil. I thought you were great.
I have
Yeah.
a question. Now, from the research that I've done,
Yes.
I have read that calcium fluoride is naturally occurring in the water supply, in rivers, streams, lakes, and so on, in very small amounts, right?
Well,
So why is
it's a little confusing from a chemical perspective.
Well,
Let
why
me-
is it sodium fluoride that they actually add to the water? It's
Okay.
a totally different substance.
It is. It is a different substance. The trouble with calcium fluoride, for this purpose, is that it's very insoluble in water. It's not very soluble. So it's much more difficult to prepare a solution of calcium fluoride to do what they want.
But-
Sodium fluoride, on the other hand, is very, very soluble.
But the question is calcium fluoride the actual beneficial one?
No.
Or does it have any benefit either?
Yeah. Okay.
Because
It's a good question, and I can understand the confusion here. First of all, natural fluoride, which is what you're talking about, is wrecking the lives of millions of people worldwide. It's natural fluoride, calcium fluoride.
Okay.
Natural fluoride is wrecking the bones of millions of people in India and China because they're getting it at high doses. Okay, so it's damaging. And it's natural fluoride that is causing this lowering of IQ in the studies that have been done. What I have to tell you is in water, you don't have calcium fluoride. You have calcium ions and you have fluoride ions. And to complicate the issue, you may have a complex of calcium and fluoride, but I want to get into that. But basically, when you have naturally occurring fluoride in the water, it's usually accompanied by a large excess of calcium, maybe 100 times more, because you're dealing with hard water. Most of the fluoride that occurs naturally is in hard water, and you've got this large excess of calcium and sometimes magnesium, both of which are protective to a certain extent of fluoride's toxicity. And the reason they're protective is if you've got a lot of calcium around in your gut, when you swallow fluoride, then the calcium and the fluoride combine, they're insoluble, and go out through the feces. So to a certain extent, you're protected by calcium. And it's conceivable, or not proven, that one of the reasons that the Brits can drink enormous amounts of tea, which has naturally high levels of fluoride in it, the way they get away with it may be is they always drink their tea with a lot of milk. And it may be the calcium in the milk which is actually taking the fluoride out and preventing the absorption. But the protection of calcium is to protect against the absorption of fluoride in the gut.
And I also read that what they're actually putting in the water, oftentimes, maybe not all the time, it's actually not sodium fluoride, but it's actually hexafluorosilicic
That's right.
acid. Hexafluorosilicic acid.
Yeah, that's exactly what I talked about on point argument number 9.
Okay, I missed that.
Yeah. These substances are obtained from the wet scrubbing system of the phosphate fertilizer industry.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
from aluminum production, too.
No, I don't. Not today.
No.
Aluminum, the aluminium industry, Alcoa was advertising sodium fluoride right at the beginning.
Okay.
In the 50s.
Okay, so that's...
They're out of it. They're out of it, as far as I'm aware. And I don't think the aluminum industry gets anywhere near hexafluorosilicic acid sodium. Basically, the aluminum industry uses cryolite, Na3AlF6.
And I also read that sodium fluoride is a major component of Prozac.
Be careful, be careful. That's the other thing that you should be careful of. Drugs are organofluorines, okay? They're organofluorines. That means the fluorine is covalently attached to a carbon atom. That bond is very strong. It's difficult to break. And the pharmaceutical industry tends to put fluoride into a drug where it would be metabolized, to block the metabolism at that point. And so the rationale, and if that's the philosophy behind the construction of these drugs, then it's most likely that the drug will not be metabolized at this point, and the drug will exit the urine with the fluorine still attached to the carbon. So do not assume that just because a drug has fluorine in it, that it's going to produce free fluoride ion in the body. Some do, a few, and they are very serious. I mean, the consequences may be very serious for that. So what we have to do, somebody who wants to do a research thesis, should contact all the drug companies and ask them for the analysis of the metabolites in the urine to see if the fluorine is still attached to the drug. And if it isn't, then it's been metabolized, and then fluoride ion is approved. Now, why it's serious is that some of these drugs are designed, like Prozac, to enter the brain.
Right.
And if after entering the brain you get that metabolism and you get free fluoride ion, then that's very bad. You've now delivered fluoride in a place which is very sensitive to it, and you don't want to do that. But we have to demonstrate that. We can't just assume because a drug has fluorine in, it's another source of fluoride. Okay?
Right.
Yes?
The HFS acid that's added to the water source,
Yes.
and not cleaned or anything or processed before adding.
That's right.
Have there been any studies on the combination of that acid in the water source with chlorine, with other chemicals that haven't been removed or can't be removed?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's been practically no studies of HFS, so to think that they've done synergistic effects with chlorine. There is no, from what I can see, there's no obvious reason why chlorine and fluoride should interact
Or
chemically.
any chemicals that are present?
Yeah. Well, what happens when you put hexafluorosilicic acid into water is that the silicon with 6 fluorines attached breaks down. And eventually, with enough dilution, it will be the same as free fluoride ion. Okay, and they've done studies of that. And they say, study done at University of Michigan just a couple of years ago, they said, look, it's completely dissociated until you get to down to an acid pH of 3.5. Above 3.5, it's completely dissociated. There's no silicon fluoride complexes left. Well, there's 2 issues with this. Below 3.5, you've got a pretty stable complex with silicon and 5 fluorides attached to it. Okay. 2 issues. Number 1, as the thing is being diluted in the public water supply, you've got a lot of other ions floating around. Does the fluoride ion, as it's coming off, other interactions with other species like aluminum, whatever, arsenic, whatever, to form other complexes which we have no idea about? So that's one issue. The second issue is, what happens when the silica, the hydrated silica and fluoride hit the stomach? Because the stomach has a pH of about 1 or 2. Now you're below that 3.5. You may have dissociated it completely at the source, but now when it hits our stomach, they recombine again, and our gut has to deal with these silicon fluoride complexes. And the reason that this became a big issue, it seems so arcane for the average person, the reason it became an issue is that Masters and Copeland did 2 studies, one in Massachusetts and one in New York State, millions of kids, and they had the blood lead levels. And they found that the blood lead levels were significantly higher in the communities that used hexafluorosilicic acid, or the salt, than the communities that used sodium fluoride, and certainly than the communities that used neither. So they argued, they couldn't understand why this was happening, and they argued it may be because the silicon fluoride complex is complexing with the lead and facilitating the lead going into the bloodstream, and that wasn't happening with the free fluoride ion. So that's why there was so much interest over these silicon fluoride complexes. But that's been partially displaced by the fact that now they've shown the fluoridating chemicals, in conjunction with things like chloramine, actually increase the solubility of lead in the brass fittings in pipes. And that's serious. I mean, we don't need any increase in lead exposure in young children in this country, none. And if the fluoridating chemicals are doing that, that should be enough in itself to stop fluoridation. Just that one fact, increasing lead solubility. But it's still up in the air. There's still more research that needs to be done to resolve this one way or the other. Yes?
Having done a little research about the blanket approval of how the government does different things, I would like to just mention that your movie is great.
Thank you.
This one here is toxic sludge is good for you. This one is on aspartame. This is on genetically modified foods. This one is on Generation X and doing pharmaceutical drugs for teenagers generally. And this is called Big Pharma, Marketing Disease Pushing Drugs. And my question is, what are next steps? Because I thought what I heard or what I've read is that once a community has fluoride in its water, it is illegal to take it out.
That, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but that doesn't sound as if it would get past the Supreme Court of this country. The fact that somebody passed some kind of law 20 odd years ago can fix us for all time to drink something, even though the current legislators and the current public say no, they don't want it. I think the first order of business is Elahu is going to send to Colleen, as she said, any questions that you have that she's going to address. That's the first order of business. See if they can answer those questions. And maybe you should recommend that people might recommend a moratorium until those questions are answered to your satisfaction. I think that would be a rational way to proceed. By the way, I think there's going to be a heavy price to pay once the public loses trust in their regulatory agencies. If we don't trust the CDC, that's why I think there's going to be a heavy price to pay, because there are going to be times, I think, when we will have to trust them. They won't be able to prove something, but they'll say, trust us, we really believe it. And if we've lost that trust, we could run into serious problems. Now, I've lost trust in the CDC. I wouldn't believe a bloody word that comes out of their mouths on this subject, okay? But there's another issue that's right with us right now. They're wanting everybody to have these vaccinations. Now, these vaccinations, I'm not sure about whether the vaccinations are dangerous or not dangerous, the vaccination itself. Well, what I can tell you is that this flu vaccine contains organic mercury. And anybody that injects into a baby's bloodstream organic mercury should be nowhere near a position of authority, because they're just not trustworthy. Organic mercury injected into a bloodstream, knowing that organic mercury is a demonstrated neurotoxin, it's absurd.
That's called the thimerosal?
The thimerosal, yeah, thimerosal. And this went on for years, and it wasn't until somebody one day was doing the calculations and they said, whoops, now that we're giving 48 vaccinations to a baby before they're like X months of age, they calculated all the thimerosal the baby was getting, and it was 100 times higher than the safe dose to swallow. To swallow. And we're injecting it directly into baby's bloodstream. It's absolute lunacy. Irresponsible. And yet the CDC is promoting it and defends it. So somehow we've got to clean up these agencies. They've got to tell the truth, and they better start being scientific about some of these issues. Those two in particular. Yeah. Just might be.
We have time for one last question, and there will be time afterwards for discussion. Dr. Conant can hang around for a few minutes, but we have to close up the shop here. So one last question here.
One more question?
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
I don't have a question, but it's concerning animals.
Yes.
It's affecting animals and the ways that people do not know about.
Yes, there's been a fascinating case in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, where horses, it's now been pretty well demonstrated by vets and others that horses that drink fluoridated water, remember, horses drink, 50 gallons of water, a lot of water. And they came down with these prize horses, quarter horses, prize horses suddenly came down with this whole litany of health problems, and some of them died, and eventually they said, it twigged it was the fluoridated water. And the reason that they twigged that it was the water is that the horses presented with this trough full of water, which was from the fluoridated, rejected this nice clean, and would go down to muddy streams and drink the water there. So they knew there was something in that water that was hurting them. So yes, the animals, once again, may be a sentinel. The canaries, horses are big canaries, but they have to do it. Hey, thanks a lot for everybody for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Conant, for the presentation. There are many questions that you raised tonight, and I do plan to take some of those questions to the Ohio Department of Health and other agencies as a follow-up and see what kind of responses we can get from them. So
Good.
Thank you all for coming.